Bonjour, willkommen, howdy, and welcome to the FARG Motorpool. So, what are we looking at today? We're down here on the very warm south coast of the UK, and we've got a delicious lineup of French military vehicles that we're going to be having a look at. So you can see our AMX 13105 in the back, so we've been taking that around the ring and doing some shooting with that. We'll drop that video in a little bit later, but for now we're going to have a look at French soft skin, in particular the French Jeep. No, it's not one of these. It's not the Hotchkiss. We're actually going to go a bit further down the line and we're going to look at the Delahaye. At the end of the Second World War, the French forces were on their knees and they were using borrowed kit from the Americans, and mostly it was the Willys Jeep. Many people know that after the war the French continued making Jeeps, and indeed they ended up with what was this, which is the Hotchkiss M201. But there's a little less known Jeep that came before that, and it was in and around the 1950s. So let's have a look. The French fighting doctrine had just changed at the end of the war, and they'd introduced a whole suite of new vehicles. They brought in the AMX 13, that was sort of designed in 1947, coming in at the beginning of the 50s. We also had the Panhard EBR, I'll flash one up here. This was an 8-wheeled monster, and again that was brought in the 50s for this sort of rapid army that the French were aiming towards. And they felt at the time that they needed to have a homegrown product rather than continuing to use American kit that they've been lent. They wanted a soft skin vehicle, légère, tout-terrain. There we go, I got it, VLTT. The French are now listening to me and cursing me for saying that, but there we go. So the VLTT was a group of vehicles that were going to be light troop transports and be able to move around the battlefield, and this was the product. Now, Delahaye, so we can see on the name of the company. So Delahaye, you may have heard of them. They were a luxurious car brand. I'd say in France, sort of the equivalent of like Mercedes-Benz's in Germany. So it was sort of the top echelons of motor cars were made by the Delahaye company, and they've been going for a very, very long time. Unfortunately, after the war, the sales of luxury cars were quite slow, and Delahaye, I think, sold about 500 cars in about 2 or 3 years. So they were not producing a great deal. So when this contract was made available through the French army to produce a replacement for the Willys Jeep, they absolutely jumped at it, and the Delahaye was what was produced. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a quick once around the vehicles. This is a 1952, I think. The vehicle was used sort of from 51 through to about 55, 56. When we're getting into the end of the 50s, then the Delahaye company was struggling. The vehicle was a bit too expensive and quite dangerous, and we'll talk around those issues a little bit later. And so they went back to the Willys Jeep, and this time it was produced by Hotchkiss. Hotchkiss, who were working with brands, Hotchkiss brands, assimilated the Delahaye company, and that was absorbed into Hotchkiss because it wasn't doing very well, and then that was the end of the Delahaye VLTT. Everything went over to this, which you recognise as being the Willys Jeep, but this is actually the Hotchkiss M201, which is slightly different, and we'll have a video on that in the near future. So let's have a good look around the Delahaye. Here we are at the front. Very straightforward. The axles at the front of this and at the rear are identical. So the idea was that you'd be able to change the front and rear axles or interchange them as ever was necessary. Obviously it's got steering couplings on this one. So that was quite an innovative way of looking at some of the challenges they were facing. Larger tyres. You can notice here we have got a, rather than sort of C-shaped frame, we've got a C-shape underneath, but there's these strengtheners here, sort of triangular shape, that's holding the steering and the front axle. And on the front here, just one of, they call these little pig's tails, which is to attach and pull it out of trouble. The actual suspension, and we're going through here to at the back, you can actually just see in here, a bit of dirt on it, we'll just pull that off. Okay, here is a torsion bar suspension. So there is a bar that goes through here, and it's the twisting of that metal that provides the spring, rather than sort of elliptical springs or coil springs that you might see on other French vehicles. So that was quite a novel way of approaching the suspension, and it makes this very, very comfortable across road, across country. Problem is, too comfortable, because you end up going a little bit too fast and then accidents happen. The bodywork, so a lot of the strength of the Hotchkiss Jeep was actually due to the pressings in the body and the chassis. In this case, the body here is very flat. There's not many curves on it really, so it is quite thin. Rather like the Willys Jeep, we've got the fuel tank, which is underneath the seat, and the floor is made out of this sort of checker plate. It's very boxy, so it's quite a large transmission tunnel. You can see how flat it is. But what's fantastic is all of these lift off, so you can actually get to the mechanics underneath. I think just under here we have there again, you can see the floor that actually is able to lift. And that's probably the worst place for these to rot down in there. I know, I've had a couple. Right, so as you can see, we've got this sort of checker plate and it's throughout. Now it's a really clever thing, rather foolish, and very clever at the same time. In the back is the rear seat for carrying passengers, but if we were to carry a large load and we don't want to carry human passengers, this seat actually folds over, and you can see that it turns into a level loading bed. So very easy there to get your ammunition in, your stores in there, in and out really quickly. Also, the way that this roof folds down is really clever. It actually sort of concertinas in on itself and folds up quite neatly. So that's a nice little extra there, and here's sort of grab handles to make sure if it's all going a bit dicey off-road, you're trying to hang on. I said that there was one good thing and one bad thing. The bad thing are about the seats, and if you have a look at these, they are hinged, which is a fantastic idea to get in and out quite quickly. But if you're in a crash, that's not the best seat to have, because basically you're catapulted straight forward into this enormous upright steering wheel that really is quite a dangerous piece of kit to have immediately in front of you. And no roll cage, no seat belts. I think I love describing these as death sledge, because they are just very low and very fast and very heavy, and once they go over, which is incidentally something I discovered very recently, and hence why I'm limping at the moment, but that's a story for another day. Okay, so handbrake, very French down here, down underneath the dash, sort of something from like a Citroen 2CV. We've got high and low ratios, diff locks, and we've got a 4-speed box. Overhead engine on it, a sports engine. We'll carry on around the back and we'll see what else we can see. These little things here are interesting. They're actually carrying handles for you to be able to get this out of trouble. When you compare them, we'll just go over here to the ones on the Hotchkiss Jeep. Very robust, but these sort of like very dainty ones. So I think the whole the theme of this is quite a sort of a dainty-ish vehicle. Okay, so at the back, the bumperettes people recognise. Lights, very similar to off the Willys Jeep. We've got this extended corner here to get a reflector on. The fuel cans, interestingly, these here are very hard to get hold of. I don't know if this one's original, but they were always square, which is interestingly exactly the same as they have now on the Peugeot P4. So a hangover from this, which was made in the 1950s, is still on a vehicle in sort of French service as we speak. So it's a square jerry can holder rather than the rounded one that you get on the Willys Jeep. Rear tyres mounted quite low. It's a big tyre. If you look across onto the Hotchkiss, you can see how it's a good sort of 3 or 4 centimetres higher. This is right down on the bumper to get it out the way, so you can sort of reach over the top of it. And there's this quick release system. Very, very clever. If you were trying to take the spare wheel off of that Hotchkiss Jeep, you'd have to muck about trying to undo wheel nuts and actually take that wheel off. This, you just spin this off in the middle, and this was carried on into some of the French lorries of the time. Carrying round, another light. Now this time you can see why there's this extended sort of metal bracket, and this to take the light because this wheel's sort of getting in the way, so the bracket on this side's housing that other light. Again, as we said, torsion suspension, exhaust pipe very similar to the Willys Jeep and the Hotchkiss Jeep. Now I have seen these in which the exhaust pipe was routed over the back wheel and exited at the back. That would have made it quite quiet. So something like on an early like Land Rover Series 1, but not on this one. It's poking out through the side. Lastly, looking inside, here we have the glove box, handles to hang on for dear life, Pioneer tools that can be actually kept down here in the footwell, The windows, very like most cars from sort of the 1930s, utility vehicles. These actually folds forward and the whole thing comes forward. Now, interestingly, on the Willis Jeep, so we can look over here on this one, on this Hotchkiss, you can see the Pioneer tools. So this is the shovel and the axe. That's kept on the external side of the vehicle. On the Delahaye, there was an attempt to stop losing those because those could come loose or get bashed off, and so the Pioneer tools were mounted on the wings. Going round to the front. Now, if you ever want to buy one of these, there's a few things you've got to make sure that's still present in it, because they're going to cost you an absolute fortune if they're missing. One is the carburettor. Well, one is the engine. No, we'll just say the carburettor is a nightmare. It's like a one-off, and you can't really get those anymore. Did I say 3? I'm only going to do 2 because my brain's gone. Been out in this field too long. Okay, and the second one is the headlamps. If you notice these, they have a blackout light is integral to the actual lamp itself, and that comes on a post. Now, these lights can cost anywhere from £500 to £600 each, so you want to make sure he's got his headlights. But here's a top tip: they're exactly the same as came off of the early AMX 13 tanks. See, passing over all my secrets. On the bonnet, the windscreen folds down. We've got release catches holding it down. It just comes onto these little rubber stops. Quite straightforward. And what we're going to do now is we're going to delve inside the mysteries that are the Delahaye engine. Notice the way that the bonnet opens. It says, okay, so it opens back on itself. Very French, some of the designs. If you're having difficulty hearing me, there is a Bristol aircraft engine running up behind us. That's quite loud, so we'll see what the sound comes out like. So I'll carry on. If necessary, we'll reshoot. Okay, Delahaye engine. There we are, 4 cylinders, overhead valve. We've got a distributor on there. Cleverly, there were actually 2 coils. One was a spare and one was in use, so you could swap between the 2. Spare oil was carried. That's quite novel in there with the engine. And this thing here, I'll let you have a couple of moments to guess what you think that is. Okay, that is the oil reservoir. That is the sump. The sump is not on the bottom of the engine. The sump is up here at the top. So you can top that up with oil and get it checked really easily. And so this is called a dry sump, rather like what I've got at the moment. A dry sump engine. Very basic oil filter, and there's that wonderful Solex carburettor over there, and air filter, quite a hefty one. Double fan belts. Most of the French went with that, and if you notice, it looks like the fan is not symmetrical. I suppose that's to help with balancing. I think Volvo did something like that in the 70s or 80s. So there you go. Nice engine, very well built. It is I believe it's a cast block aluminium or alloy head, and it was a sports engine, really, and that was a bit too much with 4 speeds to put in this here, which is weighing, I don't know what this would be, about 1.5 tons. I mean, and with no roll cage, no seat belts, no collapsible steering column. See, it's a complete straight line right through and right into your chest here. So as you can imagine, with a nice folding seat like this, a complete tube in front of you, this is just a death trap. And that was the case. Lots of people lost their lives driving these far too fast. It was a steady vehicle, very good off-road, but people were driving it far too fast, and they were quite easy to flip over. So poor, rest in peace, the poor conscripts that were given one of these and drove them like Billio. So that was a quick run round. This lasted until the mid-50s, and then that was replaced by the Hotchkiss Jeep. So we were doing a video about that later. Let's have a look how easy it is to get in, out and control this vehicle. You're going to bear with me, my legs are not in great shape due to something I've been hinting at, and I'm sure we'll cover in another video. Okay, so you will notice it's quite easy to swing your feet in and out because there's this quite low cutout. once you're in, it's a very natural driving position, but this steering wheel is really in your face. I mean, I think we could have got away with it being a little bit further forwards, but most of the people that were driving these were sort of 17-year-old conscripts, so they were a lot slimmer than myself. And so they would have found it a lot easier, but it's a nice driving position. You do find on these that the steering gets a little bit vague. They do wear out the worm steering on this, so the ones that I've had have always been quite a handful to even keep in a straight line. Nice driving position, nice gear stick, easy to do, handbrake, accelerator, braking, clutch, and we've got the light dipper switch on the floor as you get on the Jeeps. The dials in the middle are pretty straightforward. So we've got our lighting here, we've got some gauges, one is the choke and one is the windscreen wipers, which are sort of mounted the correct way up. A horn indicator, I never knew what that did, I'm not quite sure what it does, and this is just a power takeoff for lighting cigarettes, I would have thought, sort of thing you would do. What a wonderful bit of kit. Cost too much, a bit too dangerous, drove too fast. The maintenance on them was a bit of a nightmare, apparently. So these were phased out, and then they moved over to the Hotchkiss M201. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be looking at some other interesting bits and bobs. We'll have a look around our AMX in another video about loading a shell into it and how that actually comes out that little door at the back of the turret on that oscillating turret that we've got. So that'll be quite interesting, and we'll see you for that. Bye bye.